I drove to Northgate Mall to buy a 21st birthday gift for my son, Noah. Honestly, I just wanted a normal day. Pick out a present, head home, have dinner, maybe share a few laughs to shake off the usual stress. Emily, my wife, came with me, but the moment we pulled into the parking lot, she stepped away because the hospital was calling. She stood near one of the concrete pillars, talking on the phone for a long time. Her face looked tight, like something serious was happening. I didn't think much of it. Not at first. Then an older security guard walked up to me. He glanced in Emily's direction, then looked back at me and asked quietly, his voice unusually serious, "Is that your wife?" I nodded. The man swallowed, stepped a little closer, and lowered his voice like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "You need to see this." He pulled out his phone and opened a video from the parking lot cameras. The moment the screen lit up, I knew this was no longer going to be a normal day. Hank Dalton held the phone closer, his hand trembling slightly, but his eyes steady as steel. On the screen was clear parking lot security footage, complete with a visible timestamp. And the woman in the video wasn't a stranger. It was Emily. She stepped out of the car and paused for a second, glancing around like she was checking whether anyone was watching. Then, a man in medical scrubs walked up to her. There was no polite greeting. No distance you'd expect between coworkers. They stood close, too close, the way people do when they're already comfortable with each other. The man placed his hand on Emily's back. Emily tilted her head up and smiled. And then, they kissed. Not a hesitant kiss. Not a moment of confusion. The kind of kiss that looked practiced like it had happened dozens of times before. My ears started ringing. Hank lowered his voice. "I've seen them here more than once. I saved the footage because you deserve to know." I watched the video again, desperately trying to find some explanation, some angle that would make it look different. But the truth was right there on the screen, clear and cold. And it had just shattered the normal family I thought I was living in. I'm not telling this part so you can sit there, feel satisfied, and scroll away. I'm telling it because sometimes the knife in your back doesn't come from an enemy. It comes from the person who sleeps next to you every night. If you're still watching this, leave a comment saying where you're from. I want to know how many people out there are living in a marriage that looks fine on the outside, but is rotting on the inside. I'll change a few small details to protect real people. But the chill running down my spine in that moment, that part is real. And listen carefully. I didn't storm over there and start a jealous scene like a fool. I didn't cause a spectacle in the parking lot and turn myself into the out-of-control husband while she played the victim. I took a slow breath, handed the phone back to Hank Dalton, thanked him, and walked into the mall as if nothing had happened. But inside my head, something had already switched. From that moment on, I stopped looking for a reason. I started looking for evidence. I stood in the parking lot for a few more seconds, watching Emily still pretending to be on that hospital call, like an actress committed to her role. If I rushed over and confronted her right then, I'd turn myself into the crazy husband, and she'd get the perfect chance to erase every trace and rewrite the story in her favor. So I did the opposite. I swallowed the anger, nodded my thanks to Hank Dalton, and walked away like nothing was wrong. I went into the mall. I still picked out a birthday gift for Noah. I still texted like everything was normal. My face stayed calm. My breathing stayed steady. Because I understood something important in that moment. When a cheater thinks they're safe, that's when they're the most careless. The hospital's been crazy today. The doctor kept calling. Schedules changing. I just nodded and gave a quiet. But in my mind, one decision was already locked in. I wasn't going to deal with her using emotion. I was going to deal with her using evidence. When we got home, Emily kept acting like nothing had happened. She slipped off her shoes and started complaining in that tired, dramatic tone. Today was chaos at the hospital. Dr. Vaughn kept calling me non-stop. The surgery schedule kept changing. I froze for just a split second, not because the name was common, but because it lined up perfectly with what I had just seen in that parking lot video, the man in scrubs, the way he walked, the way his hand rested on Emily's back, the kind of familiarity that doesn't belong to coworkers. I didn't ask, "Who's Dr. Vaughn?" right away. Asking too directly would have tipped my hand. Instead, I just nodded and acted mildly interested. "Yeah. Dr. Vaughn? Is he that demanding?" Emily answered quickly, too quickly. "Yeah. Something like that. I'm tired. I'm going upstairs." Then she headed up, carrying her phone with her like it was a living secret she couldn't let out of her hands. I stayed downstairs. And another conclusion locked into place in my mind. The video wasn't a misunderstanding. It was only the surface. Dr. Vaughn was the name that would eventually drag this entire story into the light. From that night on, I started looking at Emily differently. Not as my wife who's probably just busy, but as someone who was hiding something. She started carrying her phone everywhere. Into the bathroom, next to the tub when she showered. At night it stayed under her pillow, screen facing down. Emily had never been like that before. The moment that really stuck with me was 2:04 a.m. I was half asleep when I heard a faint vibration, the kind of vibration set deliberately low so it wouldn't wake anyone. Emily shot upright immediately and grabbed the phone in a reflex that looked almost panicked. The glow from the screen lit her face for a split second, just long enough for me to see the fear in her expression. She killed the screen right away and whispered, "Just spam." But I knew spam messages don't make someone react like they've just been caught. The next morning, she changed her passcode. Her phone stayed on silent all day, and every time I walked into a room, she would instinctively lock the screen. At that point, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was observing a pattern, and patterns don't lie. Piece by piece, the small details began forming a clear picture. Emily wasn't just having an affair. She was living two separate lives, and I had just stepped into the second one. That's when another realization hit me. If I tried to investigate this myself like some amateur detective, I'd only end up exposing my hand. And if I wanted to win, I had to play it the right way, clean evidence. So I did what any calm, strategic person would do. I went online and searched for private investigators in my area. I filtered for people with proper licenses, the kind who specifically handled infidelity and financial fraud cases. And I didn't choose the one who talked the most. I chose the one who asked the right questions. I met Brady Merrick at a small coffee shop. He studied me for a moment, then asked the question straight, no small talk. "So what exactly do you want? The truth for a divorce? Or the truth for a lawsuit?" I answered just as plainly, "Both. I need to know who Dr. Vaughn really is, where they meet, and whether money from my house is disappearing." Brady nodded once and opened his notebook. "All right. From this moment on, don't confront anyone. Just live your life like everything's normal. Leave the rest to me." And just like that, my situation shifted. I was no longer operating on suspicion. This had become a structured investigation. 3 days later, Brady Merrick sent me a message. Only one sentence. "Got something. Meet me." He placed a stack of printed photos on the table, along with a short report, tight, clean, the way a police file looks. The first line alone made my stomach drop. "Dr. Preston Vaughn." Brady confirmed it. Vaughn was a doctor at the same hospital where Emily worked, and whatever was going on between them, it wasn't new. He slid the photos toward me. Clear shots. Emily walking out of the hospital parking lot with Vaughn, the two of them getting into the same car, driving straight to a hotel. No rush, no hesitation, no clumsy sneaking around. It looked like a routine, like they knew the route, the timing, even how to move in ways that avoided most cameras. But the ugliest part wasn't in the photos. It was on the last page of the report. Money. Brady tapped the list of transactions. Small transfers, leaving our joint account first a few hundred, then a few thousand. Not big enough to set off alarms, not dramatic enough to catch attention, just steady, like someone slowly drawing blood, little by little, hoping I'd never notice. He looked at me and said it simply, "Ryan, this isn't just an affair. This is a plan." But I didn't stop with Brady's report. I went back to Northgate Mall to see Hank Dalton, the older security guard who had shown me the video that day. I needed to know one thing. Was he just being kind, or did he know more than he had said? When Hank saw me walk in, he sighed, like he'd already expected I would come back. He led me into a quiet corner of the security room where no one passed by. Then he spoke plainly. "Ryan, I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't want to destroy your family, but I can't keep this to myself anymore." He opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Inside were a few documents and what looked like a medical test report. Hank looked at me, his eyes red, but his voice steady. "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are." He paused, then said the words that froze me where I stood. "I'm your half-brother." Hank slid the paper across the table toward me. DNA results, along with a few notes about a father I never even knew existed. His voice dropped, almost bitter. "Watching her do that to you, I couldn't stay quiet. That's why I showed you the video." And in that moment, the entire story shifted to another level. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This had become a war, and suddenly, I had a blood relative stepping out of the shadows on my side. After Hank Dalton's twist, Brady Merrick and I stopped focusing on the simple fact that they were sleeping together. That part was almost irrelevant now. The real problem was the money. Brady spread the bank statements across the table and circled transaction after transaction in red small transfers I'd never paid attention to before. They were split into pieces, scattered across weeks and months, the classic pattern of someone quietly siphoning money so the victim wouldn't notice. Then one day, the pattern changed. The small withdrawals started turning into bigger ones, like they had finally decided I was blind enough not to see what they were doing. And Brady leaned back in his chair and said something that stuck with me. "Ryan, people who cheat hide their feelings. People who steal hide their math." At that point, we both knew this story was heading somewhere much darker than betrayal. And right there, sitting in that quiet coffee shop, something inside me settled into a cold, clear focus. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a pattern. And patterns leave trails. Hank had more than just that video. He handed over a few photos he'd kept, shots showing Emily meeting Vaughn not only at the mall or the hospital, but also at what looked like a private office building. Brady flipped to the final page of his report and tapped a name that kept appearing beside the outgoing transfers, a company I had never heard of. Summit Healthcare Partners, LLC. Total amount over 6 months, $180,000. I just sat there. My ears were ringing again. Because, by that point, this wasn't about emotional betrayal anymore. This was a plan. Use the affair as cover. Use the lover as the channel. And use my silence to slowly turn me into an ATM that didn't know it was being drained. Then Hank looked at me and said something unexpected. "Come with me to my place." At first, I thought he meant we'd just sit down, drink coffee, and talk through everything. But when we got there, I realized that wasn't what he had in mind at all. He opened a small room behind the garage and flipped on the light, and I froze. The wall in front of me was covered in evidence, an actual investigation board, printed photos, timelines, arrows connecting events, bank statements, business records, addresses, license plates, everything arranged with the kind of precision you'd expect from a real case file. Hank pointed to the center of the wall. Summit Healthcare Partners, LLC, circled in red. Around it were dates of money transfers, photos of Emily meeting Dr. Preston Vaughn, and handwritten notes marking the repeating pattern. Mall, hospital, hotel money transferred to the LLC. The cycle repeated again and again. Hank spoke quietly, not proud, not dramatic, just cold and direct. Ryan, I didn't track this out of curiosity. I tracked it because I could see someone was bleeding you dry, piece by piece. And if you don't wake up, they'll take everything and disappear. He let that sink in for a moment, then added something that hit even harder. People like this don't stop at 180,000. That's just the warm-up. I looked at that wall and understood something immediately. This wasn't a family problem anymore. This was a structured operation. Hank then told me there was one person I absolutely needed to meet if I wanted to tear this thing apart the right way. Audrey Kingsley. We met Audrey at a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of town, the kind of place people choose when they want to talk without being noticed. Audrey didn't waste time. She placed a thick file on the table, clipped tightly together like it had been handled many times over the years. Inside was everything I needed to understand one thing very clearly. Dr. Preston Vaughn hadn't just fallen into an affair. This was his pattern. The file contained old civil lawsuits, emails and text messages, fake investment agreements. Vaughn used to lure people in. Audrey tapped the folder lightly and looked straight at me. Vaughn doesn't just cheat, she said calmly. Then she flipped to another section of the file. And your wife, Ryan, she's not the first woman he's used to get to someone's money. The file continued with a list of cities and dates: Portland, San Francisco, Denver, and every entry followed the same chilling pattern. A woman pulled in, money quietly siphoned off, and then Vaughn disappearing right when things were about to collapse. Audrey looked straight at me. You think you're the first? She shook her head. No. You're just the latest. That was the moment everything clicked in my mind. If I only handled Emily through a divorce, Vaughn would simply move on to the next target. Another family. If this was going to end, the entire operation had to be exposed. And that's when I realized something important. If I acted out of emotion, I'd lose. The only way to win was to turn everything into legal evidence. So I called the one person I trusted for that kind of fight, my sister, Rachel Whitmore, a lawyer who specializes in divorce cases and financial fraud. If anyone could turn this mess into a case that would actually stick, it was Rachel. I didn't sit there and tell a long emotional story. I just laid the facts on the table. The parking lot video, the photos from the private investigator showing Emily with Dr. Preston Vaughn, the money trail $180,000 flowing into Summit Healthcare Partners, LLC in 6 months, and Audrey's file proving Vaughn had done this before, city after city, the same pattern every time. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked just one question. Do you want to save the marriage? Or do you want to protect your assets and Noah's future? And quote, of very four. Of this, I answered immediately. The second one. Rachel nodded once, already shifting into lawyer mode. All right. Then we stopped playing defense. She started outlining the plan right there. First, freeze the joint accounts, change every password, and notify the bank about suspicious activity. Second, file for divorce based on fraud and dissipation of marital assets, meaning Emily used shared marital money for something illegitimate. Third, prepare documentation for wire fraud, which could bring federal investigators into the case. Rachel closed the folder and looked at me seriously. Ryan, once we start this, it won't just expose Emily. She tapped the name written on the report. It will pull Dr. Preston Vaughn into the light too. And honestly, that's exactly where I wanted him. For the first time since watching that video, I didn't feel like the victim anymore. I was holding leverage. Rachel had told me something very direct a few days earlier. If you want to bring Preston Vaughn down, let him talk. Don't argue. Don't threaten him. Just give him the chance to brag. A few days later, the hospital hosted a fundraising gala at a big hotel. Emily told me it was a mandatory event. I nodded, put on a suit, and went with her like a perfectly normal husband. but under my jacket was a small recording device Rachel had arranged. I walked into the ballroom and spotted Vaughn almost immediately. He stood out the way men like him always do, confident, relaxed, smiling like someone who's used to winning. He walked straight over to Emily and placed his hand on the small of her back, not casually, like it belonged there, and in that moment I knew two things at once. First, he had no idea what was coming. Second, all I had to do was let him start talking. I approached him and started the conversation politely. "Dr. Vaughn, I hear you and my wife work pretty closely together." Vaughn looked me up and down, a crooked smile spreading across his face. "We get along," he said casually. I didn't react. I just asked another question, as if it were nothing. "You mean work or money?" On the drive back from the gala, the only sounds in the car were the air conditioner and the steady click of the turn signal. Emily sat beside me, still pretending everything was normal. Then she asked in that casual, almost rehearsed tone, "You okay? You were talking to Dr. Vaughn for a long time back there." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled into an empty parking lot and shut off the engine. Then I took out my phone and opened exactly what I had prepared: the parking lot video, the private investigator's photos, and a few screenshots of the money transfers. I set the phone between us, and just like that, the air in the car changed. I put everything in front of her and said, flatly, "Stop acting. I know everything." Emily looked at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. She opened her mouth like she was about to deny it, but no words came out. After a few seconds, she let out a shaky breath, like the air had gone out of her. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to turn into this. I asked only one question, my voice cold. "How long?" Emily lowered her head. 8 months. I hadn't even asked the next question yet, but she blurted out the worst part on her own because she knew there was no way out now. "The money. We were just investing it. Preston said he could grow it. I didn't think it was a scam." I looked at her and understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just an affair. This was the same operation. I thought the betrayal and the stolen money were already the bottom. But life has a way of kicking you one more time just when you think you've hit the floor. After Emily admitted it had been going on for 8 months, I started digging through the things I had avoided for years: medical appointments, old records, all those little details that had bothered me before, but that I'd brushed aside to keep the peace. And then one piece clicked into place. There had been a time when a doctor mentioned Noah's blood type, and something about it didn't line up with what I knew about my own. Back then, I told myself it was probably just a paperwork mistake. But now, with Dr. Vaughn's name sitting in the middle of everything, I wasn't willing to call it a mistake anymore. I looked at Emily in the car, my voice rough but steady. "Emily, is Noah even my son?" She froze. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes shifted away like someone whose last layer of protection had just been ripped off. And that silence alone told me enough. This betrayal wasn't just aimed at my money or my marriage anymore. It might have reached all the way down to the very foundation of my family. Before I could even decide what I was going to say to Noah, something happened. In the kind of cruel way life likes to twist the knife, Emily made a call to the wrong person. That night, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a normal call. It was a voicemail, recording an accidental pocket dial. I pressed play. Preston Vaughn's voice came through clearly, sharp with that smug little laugh people use when they're talking to someone they don't respect. "You really think there's a we here? There is no we. You're just the one moving money for me." Emily said something quietly in the background, half apology, half pleading. Preston cut her off. "Listen carefully. If your husband finds out, that's your problem. Don't drag my name into it. I told you already, when it's done, it's done." I sat there completely still, not because it hurt more, but because I had just gotten the one thing I needed most. Audio proof that this was never some emotional mistake or messy love affair. It was a setup. This was intentional fraud. And from that moment on, I knew Emily could no longer hide behind the role of the victim. She had to choose help bring Preston down, or go down with him. After that voicemail, I stopped speaking to Emily emotionally. I spoke to her in terms of choices. I set the phone on the table, played Preston's line again, "You're just the one moving money for me." Then looked straight at her. There are two paths now. One, you keep protecting him, and you go down with him when this blows up. Two, you cooperate, help put him in handcuffs, and you still have a chance to make things right with Noah. Emily cried. I didn't soften. I called Rachel that same night. My sister was blunt as ever. If we wanted to take Preston down cleanly, we needed him caught in the act, his own words, on record, talking about the money, the plan, and how he had used Emily to siphon it out. The plan was simple and tight. Emily would text Preston and ask to meet at a quiet hotel bar. She would wear a small recording device arranged by the lawyer and investigator. Rachel and I would stay outside, coordinating with the PI and investigators nearby. The goal was straightforward. Get Preston to say the key things out loud. Summit Healthcare Partners, the money, and how he had used Emily to move it. That night, Emily agreed. Not because she suddenly became brave, but because she finally understood something clearly. If this blew up, Preston would throw her under the bus first. So she sent the message exactly the way we planned. I need to see you. It's about the money. And he took the bait immediately. Because men like Preston Vaughn always move fastest when they smell money. The next night, Emily walked into the meeting spot wearing the wire. Rachel and I stayed outside, out of sight, with Brady monitoring the audio and cameras. The goal wasn't confrontation. The goal was to let Preston do what men like him always do, talk too much. Preston arrived with that same arrogant confidence. The moment he sat down, he got straight to the point. Did you move it yet? Emily played her part, sounding nervous. I'm worried Ryan might notice. Is Summit Healthcare Partners really safe? Preston let out a smug laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they think everyone else is a tool. It's safe. We split the transfers so the bank doesn't flag them. Just do exactly what I told you. Once the money hits the LLC, it's clean. Outside, standing in the shadows, Rachel glanced at me, because right there in one careless sentence, Preston Vaughn had just handed us the words that could bury him. The moment Preston let it slip about the LLC, the split transfers, and the total amount, everything moved into case closing mode. Rachel submitted the full evidence package, the parking lot video, the PI's photos, the transfer records, the accidental voicemail, and the undercover recording that caught him in the act. At that point, this wasn't suspicion anymore. It was a documented fraud case built from multiple angles, each piece reinforcing the next. Preston hadn't just looked guilty, he had practically narrated the scheme himself. Once the investigators stepped in, Preston lost any chance of hiding behind the excuse of, it was just an affair. This was fraud, and Emily could no longer claim she had been completely manipulated unless she truly cooperated. In the end, Preston was charged, hit with a full financial investigation, and had his medical license suspended or revoked, depending on the final ruling. Summit Healthcare Partners was dug into from top to bottom, which brought earlier victims like Audrey forward to testify. As for me, I had to do the hardest thing of all, sit down with Noah and tell him the truth in the least damaging way possible. The family may have broken apart, but at least from that day on, I was no longer living inside a lie, because in the end, the thing that saved me wasn't luck, it was evidence.